One of the things that it's important to bear in mind when contemplating this legislation is the long tradition, the long history, the long heritage that we have in Western Australia, traced back all the way through to the English law with respect to habeas corpus, that is the right to be brought before a court to determine whether or not you have been unfairly detained. One of the issues that this legislation has is how do we maintain that right but at the same time protect the security of the community. Now, my contribution wasn't going to dwell overly on this legal principle. This has already been addressed by both the member for Baldivis and the member for Hillary's. Can I echo the sentiments that have been expressed in the contributions of both members and say that, in my view, I think the Minister for Police has once again done an excellent job in finding the right balance. One of the concerns that I have, so that's the first proposition that I wanted to put forward. The second proposition that I was going to advance is that this is always a tricky endeavour. We are a free society and we need to make sure that it's only in the requisite circumstances that we take steps to infringe that freedom. What is the current prevailing set of circumstances that makes it necessary for the Minister for Police to bring this legislation before the chamber in the way that she has? And I take a leaf from my friend, the member for Armidale, in quoting the second reading speech from the Minister, or paraphrasing, I should say. This legislation traces its history back to 2005 and the reaction to the London terrorist attacks. But unfortunately, this is an area where you need a government that is agile, that is innovative and that is responsive to changing circumstances. We see the tragic developments that have occurred in the United States over the last couple of days, and we know that terrorism remains prevalent. We know that there are new methods, new mechanisms, new means by which terrorism is promoted, by which it's carried out. And there is a rising tide of white supremacy that is motivating terrorism in our world. You need only look to the tragic history of the last couple of years to see just how violent white extremist terrorist movements have had a significant deleterious effect on communities across the world. We see white supremacists in El Paso motivated by racial hatred carrying out their shocking acts on the Hispanic community in Texas. We see the Christchurch Mosque massacre where 51 people were murdered by a white supremacist. We see the two tragic synagogue attacks in Pittsburgh and San Diego where worshippers were attacked by white supremacist gunmen motivated by anti-Semitic, anti-Jewish hatred inspired by social media sentiment that is currently prevalent in the community. And so my contribution was going to focus, because other members have made such outstanding contributions on the substance of the bill, my contribution was going to focus on the duty that is incumbent on all of us as voices of reason in this debate to speak out against this white supremacist terrorism, to call it out and to say as a community we need to tackle it and we need to take steps to eradicate it from discourse. And part of the problem is that this challenge hasn't been accepted by authority figures around the world. You might see, as others have said, President Trump reading in an anodyne fashion from the teleprompter, but this needs strong, forceful advocacy in opposition to racism. It needs strong, forceful advocacy in opposition to hate. It needs strong, forceful advocacy in support of mutual respect, appreciation and tolerance. When you see the example from the Pittsburgh synagogue from October 2018 of a gunman charging into a synagogue saying, "All Jews must die," during the religious service, during the observance of the Sabbath, you know that the promulgation of this white supremacist, racist sentiment is going way too far. He had this to say about a refugee organisation. He posted on a website before the shooting that HIAS, and I'm just quoting from the ABC News article from the 29th of October 2018 about the Pittsburgh synagogue shooting. HIAS likes to bring invaders in that kill our people. I can't sit by and watch my people get slaughtered. Screw your optics, I'm going in. Now, members, you'd be interested to know that HIAS is a non-profit group that helps refugees around the world find safety and freedom. Safety and freedom. This is a crazed gunman motivated by hate, racism and toxic ideology who's attacking a non-profit group that helps refugees around the world find safety and freedom. There is not one person in this chamber who wouldn't endorse those aims of promoting safety and freedom. The organisation says it is guided by Jewish values and history. That's the first example. That's the Pittsburgh shooting. I'll stay with attacks on synagogues, and I'll move now to San Diego, where the perpetrator, a man named John T. Ernest, believed Jews were destroying the white race, and he'd started becoming anti-Semitic 18 months before the deadly attack. So the report, this is from AP on the 18th of June 2019. So timely if ever there was an analysis of what's transpiring. The sole gunman in Southern California synagogue shooting in which a woman was killed told an investigator that he, quote, adopted his hatred of Judaism 18 months before the fatal attack, according to a federal search warrant. John T. Ernest, 19, also told a San Diego sheriff's detective that he was inspired by Adolf Hitler and the suspected gunman in the New Zealand mosque shooting last March. Now, this is a shooting where he killed a 60-year-old woman, Laurie Kay, as well as injuring 3 others. And, you know, may she rest in peace. What a tragic set of circumstances where this man attacks a place of worship in order to perpetuate his hate-filled ideology, an ideology that's inspired by none other than Hitler. He also, not confining his hatred of religious observance to Jewish people, he also hated Muslim people, and he tried to burn a mosque down in the nearby city of Escondido just before his attack on the mosque. A federal affidavit describes a deeply disturbed man filled with hatred towards Jews and Muslims, and he was inspired by the attacks on the mosques in New Zealand, and he was also inspired by the shooting at the Pittsburgh synagogue in October 2018. And so that brings us to the Walmart attacks that the member for Baldivis and also the member for Armidale have already canvassed in their contributions to this debate. And I just want to quote from the Wall Street Journal, an august journal of record, a great publication. White nationalists pose challenge to investigators. The shootings in Texas and Ohio, and this is an article by Dan Frosch, Jusha Ellenson and Zadie Gurman from the 5th of August 2019. Homegrown terrorists, I'm just quoting the byline, homegrown terrorists motivated by white nationalist ideologies often fly under the radar. The shootings in Texas and Ohio that killed at least 31 people over the weekend left authorities searching for how to confront the challenges posed by mass violence and domestic terrorism, especially attacks driven by white nationalist ideologies. Violence committed by white men inspired by an extremist ideology make up a growing number of domestic terrorism cases, according to the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Of about 850 current domestic terrorism cases, 40% involve racially motivated violent extremism, and a majority of those cases involve white supremacists, the FBI has said. And then the article goes on, and I recommend the article to members from the Wall Street Journal. The article goes on to recite all of the tragic circumstances throughout North America where we've had white supremacists perpetrating their violent ideology on innocent people, oftentimes in places of worship like churches, synagogues and mosques, for no reason other than to further their crazed ideologies. Now, these people do not discriminate between Jews or Muslims or people of colour. This is an ideology that's driven by this replacement theory where they're worried, they're fearful of their race being overrun. It's nothing but a shocking racist ideology which we need to identify and we need to call out and we need to condemn. And so when it comes to terrorism, we have an obligation to make sure that we say to the community that this is intolerable behaviour, that there is no space in our civil discourse, in our civil society, for this sort of hatred and animus towards people who are just going about their daily life trying to enjoy the freedoms that we in this chamber hold so dear. Now, let me quote members from The Atlantic, another excellent journal. How many attacks will it take until a white supremacist threat is taken seriously? This is an article by Uri Friedman, dated the 4th of August 2019. FBI Director Christopher Wray said recently that the Bureau doesn't investigate the ideology no matter how repugnant. We investigate the violence. The trouble is that there was, it seems, according to the article, no time to avert the massacre. The anti-immigrant white nationalist manifesto heralding an imminent attack was uploaded to the online message board 8chan only minutes before a shooter killed at least 20 people out shopping on a late summer Saturday in El Paso in Texas. But in another sense, if the US authorities confirm that the document was written by the 21-year-old white male suspected of committing the atrocity, then there was plenty of time. Numerous years in which violence by far-right white supremacist extremists has emerged as arguably the premier domestic violence threat in the United States. The government may be working to, this is the government of the United States, the government may be working to prevent these violent acts, but it's devoted less attention and fewer resources to the toxic ideology that knits them together. Right? Now, members might be aware of the Anti-Defamation League. The Anti-Defamation League is a fantastic organisation based in the United States that promotes awareness of anti-Semitic attacks and attacks on Jewish people. Now, the Anti-Defamation League, according to the article in The Atlantic, recently reported that right-wing extremists were linked to more murders in the United States in 2018 than in any other year since 1995. We've already heard from the member for Armidale about some possible hypotheses as to why that is the case when we have a Conservative president in the White House. The organisation also found that in the past decade, roughly 73% of extremist-related fatalities have been associated with domestic right-wing extremists, relative to about 23% attributed to Islamist extremists. So there's a real problem that's developing in the United States that needs to be tackled by the authorities there, and the concern is that when you see people from Australia, like the alleged perpetrator of the Christchurch mosque's attacks, motivated by the same hate-filled ideology, you know that steps taken to tackle white nationalist, racist, extremist ideologies are going to be imperative if, as a community and as a society, we're going to be tackling terrorism. Now, the problem then, as identified by none other than the Los Angeles Times, and this is an article by O'Toole from the 5th of August 2019, Trump officials redirected resources, quoting from Washington, in the aftermath of mass shootings in Texas and Ohio, President Trump vowed Monday to give federal law enforcement, quote, whatever they need, end quote, to investigate and disrupt hate crimes and domestic terrorism. But the Department of Homeland Security, which is charged with identifying threats and preventing domestic terrorism, has sought to redirect resources away from countering anti-government, far-right, white supremacist groups. These are precisely the groups that are causing the problems that I'm identifying, Acting Speaker. The shift has come despite evidence of a growing danger. This is quoting from the article now. Last year, every extremist killing in the United States involved a follower of a far-right hate group or ideology, according to the Anti-Defamation League's Centre on Extremism. The FBI has noted a sharp increase in domestic terrorism cases involving white supremacists. In June, the Acting Secretary of Homeland Security, Kevin McAleenan, told Congress that, quote, white supremacist extremist violence is an evolving and increasingly concerning threat. There is a real worry, Acting Speaker, about this evolving threat to the peace, safety and security of our community that is presented by this white extremist, white nationalist, racist ideology. We have a real opportunity in the context of this debate to say to the community, we won't stand for it. We abhor, as I said in the very first speech that I made in this place, you know, the people of Mount Lawley are all too aware of the disaster that occurs when politics is motivated by race and hate. So many, we have Holocaust survivors living in Mount Lawley, we have survivors of the apartheid regime in South Africa living in Mount Lawley. They know exactly what happens when you have a politics that's motivated by an ideology of hate based on race. Acting Speaker, I wonder if I might have a very short extension just to finish my contribution.
Extension granted.
Thank you. Thank you, Member. Can I turn now, just while I'm dealing with the topic of anti-Semitism, can I recommend to members, this is at the moment I've got it out from the Parliamentary Library, but once I've finished with it, I urge members to take the opportunity of reading this book. This is a book by Deborah Lipstadt. It's called Anti-Semitism Here and Now. And I'm just going to quote her response to the Charlottesville protest. This is an author who lives in Atlanta, Georgia, so she's well aware of what took place in Charlottesville. And other members have already noted the response from the President to what took place in Charlottesville. I'm just quoting here from page 36. Incidents that we might not previously have heard about are now celebrated on racist websites. Social media allows the extremists not only to communicate more easily with one another, but also make their voices and views heard beyond their adherents. Through the various social media platforms, these hate mongers can reach a wider audience of people, including those who might previously have not been exposed to these messages of hate. In so doing, they are normalising open expressions of hatred. Whilst many people are uncomfortable with the white nationalists and supremacists' open adulation of Nazis, love of violence and overt anti-Semitism and racism, they will not join up with them. But influenced by the extremist spread of hatred on social media, people who might not join a supremacist organisation will nonetheless begin to repeat some of their arguments. Charlottesville did not come out of the blue. We saw these extremists at work during the 2016 presidential campaign. They took particular aim at those Jewish journalists who they believed were either opposed to Trump or insufficiently supportive of him. During the primaries, Bethany Mandel, a self-described political conservative who has written for, among other publications, The Federalist and Commentary, tweeted what she described as, quote, an offhand remark about Donald Trump's, quote, legions of anti-Semitic fans. She described the responses she received as, quote, anything unlike she'd ever seen before on Twitter. She received messages, and forgive me for the language, members, branding her a Jewess who, quote, deserves the oven. Another message ominously asserted, missed one, you slimy Jewess, end quote. Not satisfied with these postings, her attackers also began to dox her, which means to find and post online private identifying information about her. She subsequently received explicit death threats, including some that were posted on her private Facebook page. Members, next Monday night, the WA Council of Christians and Jews is holding a forum at Wesley Church, which is a uniting church in St George's Terrace, which I have the great privilege of being able to make a contribution. The forum is called Council of Christians and Jews, West Australia Incorporated, Anti-Semitism, What Can We Do? This is a seminar and panel discussion. I invite any member who is interested to come along. The seminar discussion starts at 7:30 on, as I say, Monday the 12th of August in the Wesley Church in the corner of William and Hay Streets in Perth. Our keynote speaker will be Annette Adelman, and she's a Protestant theologian. She's got a master's in Jewish studies, and she's coming from the International CCJ in Hoppenheim in Germany. An eminent speaker on the scourge of anti-Semitism. On the panel, an eminent panel, in addition to me, I have Steve Lieblich, who's the Director of Public Affairs for the Jewish Community Council of Western Australia. We have Sol Matalis, who's the President of the Holocaust Institute of WA, and we have Father Michael Moore, who's the Rector at the Redemptorist Mater Cemetery in Morley, who's also a committee member of the CCJA. It is by forums such as this and by discussions where we raise the spectre of white supremacist, white nationalist, racist ideology, we call it out for what it is, and we identify it as a source of domestic terrorism. It is by taking these actions that we can serve to better protect our community. The reason I have to raise all of these issues, Acting Speaker, is because before we take steps such as this legislation does in order to curtail the freedoms that we've received from hundreds of years of parliamentary democracy through the United Kingdom, before we take steps to curtail those freedoms, we need to make sure that those infringements are justified. And when you have a look at the expansion and spread of white supremacist, racist, terrorist acts across the world, you can see that that justification exists for this government to take the responsible steps to bring us into line with the federal government. I'll finish with this point. Excuse me. I'll finish with this point. These freedoms that are so important to us are not even contemplated in the Commonwealth Constitution. The reason we need to pass this legislation is because these are referred powers that are derived from the Western Australian Constitution, which has the broad plenary power of peace, order and good government. So we have an obligation to make sure that the power that this parliament has to pass this legislation is exercised. We have a duty to the community of Western Australia and to the citizens of the Commonwealth of Australia to make sure that we take the necessary steps to protect our safety and security. So fundamental are these freedoms to us that they don't even require enumeration in the Commonwealth Constitution, and it's left to us as the Parliament of the State of Western Australia to take these necessary steps. This is a constitutional obligation that is imposed on us, which we need to take seriously. If members wish to take anything from my contribution, it is this. Please let it be this. That you must always proceed with great caution before you try to infringe on rights and liberties of free citizens. That this is a democracy that we value so dearly. But we need to do this because the circumstances of a changing world are promoting acts of white supremacist, nationalist, ethnic-based terrorism. We need to know that we can take steps to stand in the path of these hate-filled fearmongers, these hate-filled racists, these hate-filled perpetrators of violence, and say, your ideology has no place in our community. We will not stand by. This is a sacrifice that we as a community, that we as a parliament, as custodians of our free society, this is a sacrifice that we are prepared to make in order to ensure the safety and security of our citizenry. The other obligation that we have is to make sure that every time we have a microphone, every time we have a podium, every time we have a platform, every time we have a soapbox, we stand up and say, we will not tolerate this white supremacist, nationalist, race-filled, hate-filled ideology. We see it for what it is, we call it out and we say, enough is enough, take your terrorism and stick it. Thank you.